of alternatives to what is a substantially dangerous activity, i.e. cigarette smoking, that are indisputably much safer or much less dangerous. In the case of smokeless tobacco, the evidence is quite clear. In the case of electronic cigarettes, when you're not burning anything or you're not inhaling any kind of combustion products, it is undeniable. There is no way that this could not be much safer than smoking cigarettes or smoking anything that you light on fire and inhale smoke from. There's no question about that. Therefore, by their own standards, public health people should endorse these as alternatives to cigarettes.
So again,
they have been. I'm sorry.
There's got to be so. I have to think that most of these people really are actually trying to do some good. I don't know. Maybe you disagree with that, but there's got to be something that's.
They generally are quite sincere.
Yeah.
And I have given talks at public health conferences talking about this very issue, how their rationale for government intervention is completely open-ended. Doesn't mean that every one of them is a dictator. Every one of them wants to have a totalitarian system, but it means that their logic leads in that direction. And so I'm trying to persuade them of that. And the general reaction is one of complete puzzlement. They do not see themselves that way. They see themselves as only trying to help people. And I think for the most part, they're completely sincere about that. They're trying to help people break unhealthy habits, to become, to lead longer, healthier lives with less disease and less disability. That's the way they see themselves. So given that that is their agenda, they ought to be willing to say, hey, if you're a smoker and you're having trouble quitting, you really should try these electronic cigarettes, because you might find that it's a pretty good substitute. It stimulates the ritual of smoking.
Yeah.
It delivers nicotine. And it's the reasons that people smoke are complex. It's not just the nicotine, it's not just the ritual, but there are elements of both involved. And to the extent that this is a pretty good simulation of that, it's got a decent shot at helping at least some people who want to stop smoking cigarettes. The conventional treatments of things like nicotine gum and nicotine patches have very low success, right? They don't work very well. So you would think that people who are ostensibly so desperate about reducing smoking-related disease would leap at the chance to have an alternative that is clearly so much less dangerous.
So where
action generally has been very suspicious, very hostile.
Yeah.
The FDA has, as you well know, the FDA has tried to ban electronic cigarettes supposedly to protect public health. It was only stopped from doing so by a federal court. And why is that? So you have to step back, and my answer is that you cannot explain this in terms of public health. You can't explain this by the principles of public health, because according to the principles of public health, they should be getting behind these products as an alternative to cigarettes.
So where is the disconnect?
Well, to be fair to them, these are the arguments that they present are that you are encouraging people to continue smoking who otherwise would quit, and you're luring people who otherwise would not use any kind of tobacco product into using them.
But of course, there's no evidence whatsoever of that. So
there's no evidence.
Right.
So their argument is that on balance, therefore, this could be, they're thinking collectively. That's the way their whole, the way that they measure this, success or failure of a policy is in collective terms. They're not going to say, the cigarette smoker might very well want to have electronic cigarettes as a safer alternative, but that's not the issue for them. It's not a matter of what individual consumers want. It's a matter of if you look collectively at all of society over the long term, are we going to have more or less disease as a result of allowing people to purchase this product? Now, I think that the factual premises that they rely on in order to arrive at the conclusion that in the long run, all things considered, this is going to increase the incidence of tobacco-related disease is just completely implausible.
Of course.
So, it's not that they don't argue. They do try to argue it in terms of public health. They do make these arguments, and in fact, the FDA, these are the kinds of objections they would make. They say, we're not sure exactly how this is going to work out. Some people, maybe you'll only use the e-cigarettes when you're flying, and it'll help you maintain your habit. And meanwhile, kids might start to do this because it's cool, and they'll move on to real cigarettes. All these kinds of scenarios. But what they're basically trying to do there is to suggest ways in which this could actually result in more tobacco-related disease. But the arguments are so incredibly implausible. They're based on premises that by their own standards, and some people are just so hostile toward anything that resembles this thing that they've come to hate, which is tobacco and cigarettes.
Yes,
right?
it's almost that
tobacco obviously involves tobacco.
Yep.
And the e-cigarettes, they have nicotine derived from tobacco, but the main thing about them is they look like, it really is as simple as that they look like cigarettes.
And I think that's part of the reason why they're so effective for us as ex-tobacco users is because it's so close to the real thing. It's so close to a cigarette. But on the other hand, that's what people see, and they think they're seeing somebody who's smoking something. It looks weird. I don't know what it is, but hey, that person's smoking. So maybe that's where some of...
That's exactly right. So precisely the factors that make e-cigarettes potentially useful for people trying to quit, that is that it so closely resembles the act of smoking, that's also what explains the hostility from public health officials and anti-smoking activists. Not all of them, by the way. I mean, there is a minority
yes.
Of public health specialists, academics, and also anti-smoking activists who really are anti-smoking activists. So if you're vaporizing and it doesn't involve burning tobacco, that's not smoking at all. So if they're anti-smoking, they should be in favor of something that replaces smoking with something that's much less dangerous. So there are some people out there who I would say are rational, who are proceeding according to their own professed principles, and they're saying, from a public health perspective, this is a good thing because it's going to reduce the level of tobacco-related disease. So I think those people are consistent. I don't necessarily agree with all their premises or all the policies that they advocate, but on this issue, at least, they're consistent. Whereas the ones, and this is most of them, the ones who say, this is terrible, this is awful, it should be pulled off the market, the only explanation I can come up with is that it is a symbol of something that has become hateful to them, that they have gone through their whole public lives and adult lives hating, and they just can't separate out the emotion that's aroused by something that looks like cigarettes from their evaluation of the policy.
Yeah.
I think it really is as simple as it's this sort of not even a paternalistic impulse. It's an irrational hatred of a symbol.
Just based on...
Of course, to me, that's interesting for not just because in terms of analyzing public health policies, but also in terms of drug policy. Because the whole history of drug policy is about how certain substances arbitrarily become symbols of certain hated things, either hated people or hated actions. They come to symbolize these bad things, and they are prohibited because of their symbolism, not because of their actual properties. Right. So all of this comes together for me. It all is of a piece where symbolism is the main thing driving. Symbolism and emotion is what's driving policy, as opposed to the actual properties of particular substances.
Do you think in this case with electronic cigarettes, do you think it's the opposition to it is more that symbolism that you were just talking about, or on the other, you've covered prohibition extensively, alcohol prohibition, drug prohibition. Do you think it's more the symbolism, or do you think it's more an extension of the prohibition movement?
Well, both. I mean, I think they're not necessarily inconsistent. Symbolism is very important in drug policy, but there also is this notion of what you might call a kind of pharmacological McCarthyism or pharmacological Calvinism, maybe, where anything that is related to a psychoactive substance is looked at with suspicion. All right, so the fact that you have a replacement for cigarettes that is certainly much safer, but still is giving people this drug that they like, i.e. nicotine, helping them alter their consciousness. I think a lot of people just rebel at that notion. They don't like the idea, and they may not be consistent about it. It may be only certain drugs they object to, but there is this certainly at least an ambivalence and discomfort with the idea of using psychoactive substances unless it can be justified in some kind of way which may not be rational. If it's prescribed by a doctor, that's okay. It's to treat your depression.